In this episode of Scoring the Stack, we will be talking raising the bar, licensing wins and woes, and basically how licensing can affect the features and recommendations available in Microsoft Secure Score, and how Secure Score can be used to talk to your customers about upgrading from your existing business standard or business basic estate to business premium. Quick hello from me, my name's Milo. I'm a Microsoft 365 Solutions Architect here at Enforcer. My background is in MSPs. I spent the last 8 years in a technical role, starting at the help desk. Most of that time was spent delivering Microsoft Modern Work projects focused around Entra ID, Intune, conditional access, SharePoint migrations, things of those nature. Used to do a little bit of Azure as well, focused mostly on Azure Virtual Desktop once COVID made that pretty popular. But now my job is really helping our partners, success and sales teams talk technical with MSPs and making sure what we're talking about at Enforcer makes sense in the real world for MSPs. So licensing is a bit of a minefield, really, and it's probably, as technical professionals, probably our least favourite thing to talk about. But here are some of the sort of license tiers that we're typically working with, right? Business Basic, Business Standard. We're seeing more of a shift to Business Premium now, as that's becoming a pretty attractive SKU for a lot of SMBs and MSPs delivering Microsoft services to SMBs. You might be using some E3, E5 type enterprise licensing though, for those extended feature sets, or if you have, tenants with 300 and above users. But Microsoft is making this, making some of those features available in the enterprise SKUs a little bit more available for the business SKUs now with some of those add-on licenses. So things like Defender Suite, Purview Suite. Having those bundled up as well in a nice attractive $15 bundle there as well, really shows that Microsoft's starting to pay a bit more attention to the small to medium business space and offer some of those technologies that they have configured and working really well in their environments now, available not just for enterprise customers. So what does this mean for Secure Score, and how does the sort of features within all of these licenses get impacted? Well, we've got different features across some of the different license SKUs, right? Entra ID, Defender, Purview, Intune. If you're on that Business Basic, Business Standard license, maybe you've had to add on a few of those things and to be able to get those features. So, Entra ID, Plan 1 for conditional access, Defender for Office 365 to get that sort of mail and Teams protection there. But yeah, different licenses have different impacts in what things show up in Secure Score. So the different recommendations we get, and it's not as cut and dry as you think. It's not if you have that license you're going to see those Secure Score recommendations. We'll look at it a little bit more in the demo, but just because you have a license doesn't necessarily mean those recommendations are going to show up straight away, even if you've assigned the licenses sometimes. And look, as we move on here, let's think about some of the licensing gaps that we see that are common in the sort of MSP space that I've seen in my sort of relatively short tenure as an MSP professional. Most of those things come around Entra ID, right? Conditional access is something that we're being, told to use more and more as MSPs, right, to help secure our identities and make sure we're keeping on top of identity security using things like conditional access for our customers. But one of the things a lot of people miss here, and it's often overlooked, is that a single license that includes an Entra ID Plan 1 license for things like conditional access actually enables the features across the board, right? So you're going to have access. As soon as you have a single license in there, those features get lit up, right? And this can cause a lot of problems, compliance issues for MSPs where, those features can be, can have users scoped in that aren't licensed for them. And and you can get in trouble with the Microsoft licensing police if you have those users in scope of those policies and we've not licensed them correctly. So something just to watch out for there. And another example of this is sign-in risk and user risk in CA policies, right? That's actually an Enter ID Plan 2 feature. And again, only need one license for that to be available in the conditional access policy, but can very quickly become a problem when you're putting users in scope of those policies that they're not licensed for. Another risk there is, Defender for Office 365, right? It's a great platform for securing our communications with email and also Teams as well. And again, as soon as a license is added there and the policies provisioned, it lights up all the features across the board, right? And actually kind of, includes it for most of the users by default if you're following a sort of best practice configuration there. So not having all of your licenses, and that can include things like shared mailboxes. If they're not licensed properly with the correct licensing there, whether it's included in Business Premium or whether you've bolted it on as an add-on, again, potential trouble from the Microsoft police there if you get an audit. Now, granted, the Microsoft audits don't happen very often, but you or your customers wouldn't want to be caught short in a situation if it does happen to you. Looking further then at things like Purview, we've got some great Purview features now available in Business Premium, and certainly some extended features with the new Purview Suite license that we can add on, bringing some of those enterprise features down into Business Premium. But again, there's some common gotchas, right? So for things like the standard set of Purview features we get in Business Premium, which is sensitivity labels and data loss prevention policies, there's still some nuances about what you have available. So for example, auto labeling on the server side for sensitivity labels, right? We want to be able to label our data, especially in the wake of, sort of AI being a big buzz right now, and customers wanting to see how they can use AI to make them more efficient in their day-to-day. We want to use things like sensitivity labels to be able to help customers get control of their data governance. But being able to automatically label all their existing data, that's a feature that's actually reserved for a higher tier license queue. So either the E5, security and compliance type add-on, or the new Purview Suite add-on there. So again, just a few things to watch out for. So look, how does this sort of translate, and what can we see in Secure Score and in the different Microsoft portals, and how those things show up? Let's jump over to an example here, and we can have a look at what's going on. So this is my demo tenant that we looked at beforehand, and you'll see we've got a couple of different recommendations here, and particularly I'm looking at this sort of product area here. Look, Defender straight off the bat, right? We can see we've got Defender for Office policies showing up here because we've got some licenses for that. Those are showing up in here, but you'll notice even though we've got Business Premium, which includes Defender for Business, right, I'm not seeing any sort of device recommendations for Defender for Endpoint here, and this sort of presents a bit of a problem, right? Why am I not seeing these? I'm licensed for them. Why can't I see them? Well, if I look down here, let me take a look at my sort of endpoint section here, and let's go to maybe device configuration here. In fact, I'm going to just have a look in here and look at my device assets in the security portal, right? Right, I'm not seeing anything here right now. I haven't actually onboarded any devices, right? And if I go down here and then look to like device configuration, there's a couple of other things that I need to do to actually get Defender for Business onboarded to be able to use these features and to get them to actually light up some of the features in the back end for the Secure Score recommendations to show up. So you can see, although I've pushed out some policies here, I've not actually necessarily configured this correctly. And these are some of the in-tune configurations for Defender. Again, just because I've got some of these rules in here doesn't mean that Defender's actually, sort of configured correctly to be able to see those things. So if I'm just looking at the overview of my security dashboard here in the Defender portal here, I can see this endpoint's got a sort of 0 here, right? And if I actually drill further into that, I can see, look, here's some of these recommendations that I want to see in Secure Score, but you can see we've got this little sort of unplugged icon here, and it's saying there's not enough data to support this metric. You need to onboard a workload to activate this metric, right? So until I've actually onboarded some devices, those recommendations aren't going to show up. And what will this look like once they have shown up, right? Once I've onboarded some devices, what can I expect to see? Well, this is a sort of example here. Once I've got some devices onboarded into Defender for Endpoint, I'll start to see that category of device showing up here. And here's some of those recommendations showing up and their associated score. So one thing to watch out for there, just one of those situations where just because you've got the license doesn't necessarily mean all the features in the back end have been lit up, right? Let's go back to Secure Score here, and let's have a little look at some other recommendations I've got. So I've also got someone down here for information protection, right? Okay, I've got a license for that, and it's actually showing some of those recommendations already. So that's fantastic. So I could come in here and click Manage, and that's going to take me to the Purview portal. Let me pop the one that I logged into earlier. So you can see here, as I come into the Purview portal, it's going to have taken me to the area I need to be in, which would be information protection and then sensitivity labels, right? One thing to note when you're using Purview for the first time, you will often see a little bar here saying setting things up for the first time, right? Again, if you've not gone into the Purview portal before and it's not done that initial setup, you may not see those Secure Score recommendations show up at all. Now, I've been in here before, which is why I can see these recommendations now. But that takes a few minutes to set up from the off, and you might see it in a little notification here saying setting things up for the first time. Gets you to wait a few minutes, and then those will become available for you. But you can see I've got some sensitivity labels that I've created in here, and also I've got the ability to create things like data loss prevention policies. So I'm licensed for this because I have Business Premium. I've got some of those policies created. Those things are showing up for me in the Secure Score recommendations. So what's this one asking me to do, right? Extend sensitivity labels to Microsoft Purview data map. Oh, right. Okay. So I've got some implementation steps needed here. Oh, right. So actually for this particular one, I need an E5 license, something I don't have. Maybe that could be included in a different licensing set. So again, just because I've got a license and I've onboarded it, it's giving me recommendations for something that I don't have a license for. So depending on which service you're using, there's sort of nuances. There's no rhyme or reason as to which ones show up and which ones don't. Kind of just depends the way the Microsoft has configured things there. And so keep an eye out for those things. Always read the Microsoft Learn documentation. They quite often have little messages in there to say, look, you need to make sure that this particular workload is onboarded before you do it. So if you think you should be seeing a recommendation and you're not, have a look at the documentation. If you're seeing a recommendation, don't always just assume that you can onboard it. Have a look at that. Have a look at that licensing prerequisite and make sure that's enabled before you just go ahead and start putting users in scope of the policies. We talked a little bit about Business Premium as well before, and how that measures up against things like E3 and why you might be using those different licenses. A common sort of case that I see is that people use E3 licenses to give users bigger mailboxes, right? It comes with a 100 gig mailbox rather than a 50 gig one. It's a pretty inefficient way of doing things. A lot of the time you can actually just add on an Exchange Online Plan 2 license to a business standard or a Business Premium license to give you a little bit of extra mailbox usage there without having to fork out for that more expensive license. And actually, if we look at a sort of comparison of the two, sometimes E3 is actually missing some of the features that Business Premium has. So you can see E3's got some basic Defender for Endpoint Plan 1 coverage here, but actually Business Premium includes some of the Defender for Endpoint Plan 2 in their sort of Defender for Business SKU that they call it. So we get things like EDR, threat analytics, right, some automated investigations that we're not getting in E3. So even though it's a more expensive license, it can be some things that are more important to MSPs that are being sort of missed out in those SKUs there. E3 has got some, sort of more love in recent times. I know they've recently added some extra things like, remote help and Intune Plan 2, but it's still worth watching out for those sort of subtle differences here. You don't want to drop them down to a what you think is a higher tier license, but then sort of miss out on some features that you want to use. This is M365 maps. If you ever work with Microsoft licensing, very useful to come and compare all the different features from all the different SKUs. So definitely recommend this one, M365 maps. .com. So We've talked about licensing and, the sort of way that the different features can show different things up in Microsoft Secure Score and affect our recommendations and how we can implement them. But how can we use Secure Score to actually help upsell our customers from, maybe a business standard or a basic license to business premium, right? Gives us some of these extra features. And what we can do is, using business premium, we're able to, start standardizing on tool sets for our customers, right? So, typically I see a lot at the moment. MSPs are using business standard or business basic in some instances as their sort of go-to licensing SKU, and they're filling the gaps for the other areas. With third-party tools. So, for things like manageable MFA, we might be seeing they're using Okta as almost like a whole separate identity solution that they're syncing with Entra. Or maybe you're using something like Duo to provide a more centrally managed MFA. Other areas I see, Mimecast and Proofpoint still use quite a lot. And these are good products, right? But, if I've already got customers that are either paying for business premium or I'm looking to move them up to business premium anyway to give me some extra features like Intune and conditional access, it brings so much extra functionality there that you could maybe look at starting reducing the cost of some of those extra tool sets. Another example, endpoint protection. We get Microsoft Defender for Business with business premium. And we may already be using, tools like SentinelOne or Bitdefender or Huntress or WebRoot if you're still using that sort of older technology there. If I can reduce the cost of some of those tools and use business premium to offer that as a solution, it makes it easier to manage, right? Because I'm standardizing on a Microsoft ecosystem. There's much better integration with all the different services, right? You'll start to see the services talking to each other a little better. So getting cross-referencing from, Defender for Endpoint, Defender for Office 365 and Intune and other sort of cross-functional bits there. It makes it easier to consolidate your training as well as you're training your staff, your technicians. They're able to focus on the Microsoft sort of training certifications and not sort of be distributed across loads of different platforms and having to learn different, acronyms for the way different vendors are talking about things. And again, just a cost reduction across the board. Some of your customers might already be paying for business premium. And so if I can start to reduce the tool sets, consolidate the tool sets, it makes it a lot easier for me to be efficient in the service that I'm offering and be competitive in price still. One thing I see quite often happening as well is MSPs will still be, putting some of these services down as, line items where they'll put Mimecast or Proofpoint or Bitdefender as a line item on the invoice. And you're just putting it like cost plus margin and not necessarily remembering that there's actually quite a lot of management time that goes into that as well for upkeeping those products. So thinking about how I can bring some of these services and generalize and things like, mail protection and endpoint protection and identity protection and build them into, whether it's a separate service with a, management sort of wraparound time with some time built in there, or whether I'm, including that as part of my core service. I can start moving away from naming those specific tools and offering more of a service rather than just being a reseller of licenses. We all know that there's not much margin in in selling Microsoft licenses, right? We got 10-15% at best. So being able to offer a proper service wraparound for that is really where MSPs are going to win with Microsoft. And what things are we missing out on when we're not using, things like Entra ID P1, things like business premium, right? Well, conditional access is one of the biggest thing, right? Being able to granularly manage my sign-ins and really control who's got access to what, from where, from what device. We get so much, finer grained control and better flexibility when managing our identities in the cloud. What else are we missing? I mean, Defender for Office 365, right? That is one of the best, not just mail protection platforms out there now, but also a Teams protection platform, right? We get things like safe attachments and safe links that cover Microsoft Teams, which, Mimecast and Proofpoint often don't cover. Teams is such a big part of our day-to-day sort of working lives now. We're sharing files in there, we're sharing links. So, not having protection there is kind of a big security gap, right? By default, I could probably go to most of your customers' teams addresses right now and send them a message as an external party. You know, that external communication is enabled by default, and I could start, you know, talking with them, sharing malicious links, sharing malicious files. So, you know, having that protection there is really important from Defender for Office 365. So look, you can start to use some of these recommendations you get in Secure Score and the fact that some of your customers may have a lower Secure Score to help you in those upsell conversations to Business Premium, while at the same time reducing your costs and still offering a fantastic service. Just gives you a bit more flexibility to, you know, chop and change what tools you're using. You know, there might be a new Microsoft tool that you need to use in the future, or maybe it's not Microsoft. Maybe there's a bigger player in the space. You know, 10 years down the line, you know, we can still offer the same named service, and we've got the flexibility to choose our tooling without having to communicate that to our customers each time we want to make a change there. So some questions to you, scrolls on the doors. What license SKU are you currently offering to your customers? Do you offer different licenses based on which package they're buying, or are you trying to standardize across the board? Is this licensing choice, you know, holding back your customers' Secure Score? You know, are you not able to offer them that sort of, you know, closer to 100% Secure Score? Are they still sat at that sort of default 45%, and no real way of moving them? But leave a comment. I'll be really interested to understand what licenses you're currently using, maybe in your own business and for your customers. Yeah, I'd love to continue the discussion down in the comments. Next episode will be Score Wars. We'll be taking a look at a closer look at the different services feeding Secure Score. You know, probably focusing around specifically around Enter ID to start with, where that low hanging fruit, and how we can start to configure some of those you know, real high scoring recommendations to get some quick wins to get your Secure Score up. Quick shout out to our YouTube channel. We're releasing more and more videos over the last few weeks here. We've got some fantastic videos from my colleague Tim, who's been talking about how you can defend, govern, and improve security and data governance and compliance within your Microsoft 365 environments. So definitely check that one out. We've got some more from Nathan there, who's from our Australian office, talking about some market specific stuff there, but also has some you know, sort of common misconfigurations in Microsoft 365, which would be useful to any MSP looking to do more with Microsoft 365. And down at the bottom there, you can see we've got Lewis as well, talking about the wonders of Business Premium, probably echoing a lot of the things I've talked about today, and really let you know how you can make the most out of that fantastic SKU from Microsoft there. If you want to learn more about Enforcer, you can find us at enforcer.com. Check us out on LinkedIn, or if you want to contact me directly to talk Microsoft Secure Score, Microsoft 365 in general, or anything to do with Enforcer, you can reach me at my email address on the screen. Thanks very much.